PFL at the Hard Rock in Hollywood, Florida tomorrow night. Some PFL playoffs locally for us here in South Florida and on ESPN2. We're going to have a couple of awesome guests tonight. MMA and now NFL super agent Malki Kawa is going to join us at 6:30. Our pal Johnathan Ramlakhan from the 5 Reasons Sports Network is going to join us tonight at 7 o'clock. And 5 Rounds is served by the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill. God, I love the Quarterdeck so much. I am jonesing for some of those buffalo shrimp. The seafood is so fresh and so delicious. You know, Frank Zaffere recently turned me on to the Italian beef sandwich, and I could eat 2 of those in one night. They are so delicious. I love the baby back ribs. I love the buffalo shrimp. The cocktails will cure your ails. The beer is always cold. And guys, surely you know this by now, but keep in mind, every time there's a UFC pay-per-view fight and you're debating, should I order it at home? Should I pay the exorbitant price of $70 to watch this? Is this event worth that kind of money? Keep in mind, you can head down to the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill and watch every UFC pay-per-view fight with 0 cover charge. You pay nothing at the door to watch UFC pay-per-views, and I know some of our listeners took advantage of that this past weekend for UFC 265. If you want to find the location nearest to you and peep the menu online, I love to check out the menus before I dine. Go to quarterdeckrestaurants.com. That's quarterdeckrestaurants.com. The Quarterdeck, come for the food, stay for the fun. So we will recap all things coming out of UFC 265, which ended up being a pretty entertaining show. Not sure if it was worth the $70 price tag, so I hope you headed down to the Quarterdeck. But dominant victory by Cyril Gane. I am Alex Donno, joined as always. Let me introduce James Walker first, because James, he has the dedication to the show. He's out on location tonight, getting some emergency automotive repairs, but nothing can stop this dude from joining in. James, how are you this evening? You know, I think maybe the only thing that can stop him is the connection bug.
That couldn't have gone better.
He was looking so good in the pre-show. There he is. There he is, James. How are you, sir?
Still not going great. Still not going great.
He's got that. We always joke around that he's got the Ethan Skolnick connection. Our fearless
Can't
leader,
believe
the
kind
CEO.
of day I'm having it. Show, man.
We're gonna have to reconnect with James. It's always one of those things, Frank, where things are looking good and sounding good in the pre-show, and then as soon as we go live, we get the.
That's how we get viewership right there. That beautiful intro and then frozen James Walker.
That's how we do it. And I was in.
He kind of reminds me a lot of Derrick Lewis in the main event, just frozen, overwhelmed by the moment.
James, are you there?
I mean, you can't ask him enough times. I'm going to laugh every time.
We might have to get this man home. That might be the only hope. He's got to get those wheels fixed. He's got to get home, and then we'll bring James on. We're gonna have Manny Chang behind the scenes endeavoring to get his connection fixed. So let me introduce our other amazing co-host, Frank Zaffere at Real Frank Z on Twitter. You know, I've always got to intro you, Frank, by asking, how's the Twitter follower count doing, man?
Oh, my God. I lost 2. I lost 2 this week. I don't know. It's not going well. I did a show Saturday night into early Sunday morning thinking that might, I might pull a few more, but no luck.
And that was a really good post-fight show that you and our buddy Johnathan Ramlakhan had. And Jonathan's going to be joining us at 7 o'clock. So, people were jonesing to talk some Cyril Gane. I'm jonesing to talk some Cyril Gane. You mentioned, Frank, that Derrick Lewis's performance was as invisible as James Walker's 4G LTE connection. But it was I thought, a masterful performance by Cyril Gane. Footwork, athleticism, distance, range, octagon generalship. Really a flawless performance, Frank. I mean, the way he was mixing in the leg kicks, and a leg kick ultimately led to the finishing blows of the fight, the way he was working the jabs, the way he was working kicks to the body. It was just so hard for Derrick Lewis, who's the heavier puncher, but really couldn't find openings to unload those heavy punches because he was having such a hard time figuring out Cyril Gane's rhythm. I mean, Frank, in the first 3 minutes of the fight, Derrick Lewis didn't even throw a strike. Like he was trying to figure out Cyril Gane's timing, and it really just was a clinic. And listen, people have questions about Gane's power, especially when you're comparing him to the heavyweight champion in Francis Ngannou. A lot of people's power will pale into comparison. And even before the fight, Frank, I was thinking Gane would get the victory. I was also thinking if Gane wins, it's probably going to be by decision. But no, he was able to work Derrick Lewis to a late third round TKO finish, landed a bunch of uppercuts and a bunch of shots. But the finish wouldn't have happened, at least not when it did, if not for really buckling Lewis with a leg kick. As soon as Lewis's left leg, the lead leg, really got beaten to shreds and was having trouble standing, you knew that he really didn't have much left to offer Gane at that point, and the finish was only seconds away, and Cyril Gane got it.
Cyril Gane fought the fight we expected. He's a tremendous athlete, and everything he said about him is true. I mean, he really had a great game plan, which – you know, I'm gonna make mention of something. It was great. He did everything right. He was running from Derrick Lewis in the first round. I mean, literally turning and running at times. No.
He was getting booed for it. Yeah,
I know. Yeah. I get that was part of the game plan, but I just want that to highlight the fact that what we saw masterfully from Gane later was just his realization correctly that Lewis didn't show up. He was fighting a punching bag. The guy wasn't moving, wasn't striking, wasn't doing anything. And it was, I kept thinking about having Dean Thomas on last week and all the psychology talk that he gave us about fighters. And obviously it was a different subject matter, but still the psychology of fighting is so fascinating. And Derrick Lewis, the lead up to the fight, he had made mention publicly that he was nervous. His actions at the post weigh-in face-off indicated that he was having a hard time handling the moment. And then when he got in there, you could see it in his eyes. I mean, he wasn't there. So we got robbed of what could have been a much more entertaining fight. Look, Derrick Lewis doesn't try to figure out your rhythm. He's a brawler from the Tank Abbott style of fighting. I mean, there's no way he was like, oh, I can't throw because I can't figure out this guy's game plan or rhythm. He couldn't throw because he just didn't show up. I mean, normally he would just charge you and swing for the fences, and that's what Gane was expecting. And then once Gane realized he's not here, then he teed off and finished him, and he did it. He did it really well, and he did it while still being a little bit careful. So, which was smart because it only takes one shot from Derrick Lewis.
So you bring up some fair things about really the lack of presence by Derrick Lewis. So, Frank, how much credit do you give Cyril Gane? Because this is always, a double-edged sword, right? I mean, some people are going to give all the credit to Gane for putting forth a virtuoso performance. Some people might just take everything away from Derrick Lewis. Wasn't there mentally, which is a disappointment because he was fighting in his hometown, man. So if there was ever a time where you should be ready to perform brilliantly and give it your best, when you have the biggest fight of your life happening in your home freaking town, that would have been the time to do it. So how much credit do you give Cyril Gane after that fight?
Well, I give him a lot of credit for facing a very dangerous striker and, hey, not being overwhelmed by the moment. This is a big fight. This is a fight to challenge for the real belt. And they understood what it really was, which is a number one contender slot to fight for the most coveted championship in all of fighting sports, which is always the heavyweight division. So this was a big moment, and Cyril Gane not overwhelmed by it. So I give him a lot of credit for that. But what I don't like to do, and what I've seen a lot of people talking about and writing about in the days after the fight, is saying, man, Francis Ngannou's really got his hands full. We didn't get to see Cyril Gane tested in a way that would give me any further indication of his abilities to challenge Ngannou. If I had reservations or concerns about his ability to do that going into the Derrick Lewis fight, you should still have them now. Because nothing happened in that fight that illuminated anything about him except that he can follow a game plan really well. He's unbelievably athletic, and he's not intimidated by the moment. And that, by the way, is a big thing because when he actually challenges Ngannou, there'll be no bigger moment that he's faced in mixed martial arts.
Hey, Cyril Gane, when he goes up against Ngannou, obviously they're going to sell the fight like crazy. The UFC, they're going to promote it because they used to train together in Paris. They used to be part of the same gym. Now, it is worth pointing out, Frank, and I think Ngannou has gotten heads and shoulders better over the last few years, but a lot of the stories that come out of their sparring were that Gane used to handle him in the gym. Now, you hear legends like that in the MMA sphere, and I think you always have to take it with a grain of salt because you hear some of these stories, oh, such and such guys, it reminds me of a few weeks ago, we had this conversation about TJ Dillashaw and Corey Sanhagen. Now, Sanhagen, reportedly, when they trained together a few years ago in Colorado, Sanhagen used to really give TJ troubles, and he did give him troubles in the fight. I thought Sanhagen should have won.
I was going to say, yeah.
So sometimes these stories do turn out to be true, but there are stories about Cyril Gane really giving Francis Ngannou a lot of trouble in the gym. But first of all, Ngannou has grown so much. Stories about sparring, you always take it in context because it's not a real fight. You're doing situational things, Frank. And to me, Gane really has to fight a perfect fight to beat Francis Ngannou because his power is such a game changer. And he's always had that power. Like he had the same power back when he and Cyril Gane used to train together, right? He's always had that power. But what he's added to that game since that point is just much better conservation of stamina, right? Where Ngannou, I think, has learned how, not to blow his wad early in a fight. The adrenaline dumps are not there in recent performances. I would imagine Ngannou versus Gane is probably going to be mostly a stand-up affair anyway. But Francis has improved his defensive wrestling leaps and bounds. I think he's improved his overall game, footwork, head movement, all that good stuff. So, yeah, I'm going to heavily favor Francis Ngannou because Cyril Gane, to me, I'm happy he showed a little bit of power against Derrick Lewis, but I'm not expecting him to finish Ngannou. I think in order to get his hand raised, he's got to outpoint him and wear him out over the course of a 5-round fight. And to try and go 5 rounds against that monster without getting your face caved in by a punch, good luck with that. So he's really going to have to execute perfectly that game plan in order to get his hand raised against a guy like Francis Ngannou.
Well, that's a great point. And I think going into that, whenever that fight happens, if that fight happens, and I would like to get into that because I actually hope that fight isn't Ngannou's next fight. But if it is, when it happens, the conversation I think will be about Cyril Gane's potential knockout power or finishing power, which I think, again, in the Derrick Lewis incident that happened last Saturday was really not indicative of power as much as just overwhelming number of strikes, a million bee stings. Derrick Lewis just no answers, frozen, and I just want to get out of here, But to get Ngannou's not going to do that. So,
right.
To your point, it shapes up into the kind of fight where Cyril Gane has the talent to outpoint Francis Ngannou. But does he have the talent to not make a single mistake in 5 rounds?
Yeah.
And that'll be it because I think Francis can make a lot of mistakes. I do. I think he can make a lot of mistakes, and I don't think he'll get knocked out by Cyril Gane. But Cyril Gane only has to make 1, and oh my God, I mean, your lights could go out very quickly. So that'll be the real test.
So I want you to elaborate your opinion. You mentioned that you hope that Cyril versus Francis is not the next fight for the heavyweight title. Are you saying that with some hope and prayer that it's going to be John Jones who gets the next shot?
Yeah, it's John Jones that I would like to see, and that I think deserves it, and I think the fans deserve it. I mean, we deserve a mega fight. The casual Dana White's all about making big events that draw huge amounts of fans, and you got to get the casual fans involved. They're just starting to learn about Cyril Gane. Everybody knows about John Jones, and everybody knows the mystique of him being essentially undefeated and seemingly undefeatable. So that kind of a fight, I mean, it would just be spectacular. And by the way, I'm not a huge Stipe fan in terms of his personality and marketability, but he's a tremendous talent and the longest reigning heavyweight champion that the UFC's ever had. I think Cyril Gane should now fight Stipe. I'd like to see Stipe get a shot. I think Cyril Gane will beat Stipe, but I'd like to give Stipe the opportunity to make himself an unavoidable next choice for either Ngannou or Jones. I think he deserves that opportunity. So I'd love to see Gane face Stipe And I'd love to see Jones face Francis Ngannou. And I don't care if I have to wait a whole year for it. I don't care how long John Jones needs to gain weight. Just give me that fight. Can you imagine the pay-per-view buys? I think it could be the biggest pay-per-view of all time.
You're going to need a bigger quarter deck. Like you're going to have to expand into a warehouse.
Yeah, I mean, it would be spectacular. And look, I know what's holding it up, right? It's John Jones also knows how much money this fight's going to make, and he wants to get paid accordingly. And, I guess they must be miles apart on that for this fight, for Dana White to not already be focused on this.
And we're actually, in about 15 minutes, we're going to talk to the man who used to represent John Jones, Malki Kawa, a first-round management, is going to join us. Now, we're going to ask Malki about a number of things. I want to ask him his views on fighter pay, because he represents, a ton of big stars to this day in the UFC. Our guy Jorge Masvidal is repped by Malki Kawa. He reps Derrick Lewis, who we're going to talk a little bit more about. So I'd love Malki's take on fighter pay. We can ask him about the split with John Jones, and I think both sides have referred to as amicable. I mean, they were together, I think, as client and manager for about 11 years. That was a very, very long relationship, and both sides made a lot of money with help from the other. So I think there's some good stuff to get into there. Malki's going to join us in about 13 minutes, 6:30. He's going to join us. Johnathan Ramlakhan is going to hop on at 7 o'clock tonight. It was interesting, Frank, that you bring up Stipe as a potential next opponent for Cyril Gane, because I have Stipe in mind, and maybe this is not a fight Stipe would be willing to take, because we know how frustrated he is with the UFC right now. But to me, Stipe versus Derrick Lewis would make some sense. I mean, they're both coming off losses, and I know that usually in UFC matchmaking, they like to match up fighters coming off losses against coming off losses fighters, and coming off wins against fighters coming off wins, etc. So this would kind of make sense. And they've never fought each other, right? Because there are a lot of repeats you can do in the heavyweight division, but Stipe and Derrick Lewis have never crossed paths before. I think that fight would be a nice opportunity for Derrick to get right back in the mix, and also a nice opportunity for Stipe to re-enter a stratosphere of relevance. And Frank, it would also be a pretty goddamn interesting clashing of styles, right? When you consider just Stipe's well-roundedness, his awesome wrestling, and his Golden Glove level boxing versus Derrick Lewis's brawling, right? I think it could be a really fun match. Like, if Derrick Lewis shows up mentally right for a fight like that, and he's swinging haymakers at Stipe, that would be really interesting, because we saw what happened to Stipe when he was on the receiving end of haymakers from Francis Ngannou. His chin actually held up pretty well for a long period of time before he ultimately took the dirt nap. So I would find that to be an interesting matchup, Frank. But I just wonder, for a guy like Stipe, who is really seeming fed up with the UFC. I mean, he's boring as a box of rocks, and that's why he's not getting these rematch opportunities that some other guys have gotten. But Stipe, he's finally venting his frustration with the fact that, he's not being offered this trilogy fight with Francis, when a guy like DC kept getting offered rematches and trilogy fights with Stipe. He feels like they should give him the same respect. And he's tweeting out basically love letters to ONE FC, and he's flirting with other promoters, and he seems like he's trying to hold firm for a title shot or a big fight. So do you think, in light of the way that Stipe is lashing out at Dana in recent weeks, that being offered a fight against a Derrick Lewis, coming off a one-sided loss against the new number one contender, the new interim heavyweight champ, do you feel like that's something Stipe would say, you know what, if this is my only option, let me take it? Or do you think he would try and hold out for something bigger?
Well, not only do I think he would try to hold out for something bigger, I think he should. There's too much for him to lose fighting Derrick Lewis. He outclasses him in every way in terms of fighting acumen. So really, I mean, he beats him in what? He beat a guy who put in one of the worst performances anyone's ever seen in his last fight, and he beat him. And if he loses, oh my God, I mean, it's his career's over essentially. So I think Stipe is right now hell-bent on, I get another shot at the title, I deserve it, or bust. And I think, though, that you could convince him to fight Cyril Gane because Gane's now holding a belt of sorts. And and he's fighting someone coming off a win. As you pointed out, they usually do loser versus loser. So he gets that shot as well. And you could argue to him that you're making yourself an unavoidable choice to face Ngannou again with a victory. I also get the benefit as a fan to see Cyril Gane truly tested. Because Stipe, as much as we dislike that terrible personality, I mean, Modelo couldn't even keep him. I mean, as much as we despise that, he's so good everywhere in terms of his fighting style. Like, I think we all forgot he ended Daniel Cormier. I mean, I didn't think that was possible until he did it. I mean, he ended that guy. He sent that guy to broadcasting forevermore. So, I mean, his abilities are unquestionably unbelievable. And so Cyril Gane facing that test, I think more legitimizes him as a title contender personally with just 10 fights in mixed martial arts right now. And I think you could talk Stipe into that one.
I like that.
I would like to.
I got a question for you on a couple of other fights on the card. So maybe my memory is fuzzy, but during the event, you sent out a tweet that said, I can't miss tonight at Alex Donno, at James Walker NFL, the godfather of MMA, Jose Aldo Jr. with the win. Didn't you a week ago say that Jose Aldo was like too old to even be in the UFC anymore?
I did, and I switched my pick, and I explained it. I switched my pick based on Dean Thomas's insights on our show.
That's right.
Dean told me that in his professional estimation, Jose still has it, and
he was right.
And he was right, and it was fun to watch because for me, and you and others who have been into the sport for many, many years, it's fun to watch these people these fighters that, were great yesteryear that casual fans don't really know about, and to see them put on those kinds of performances. So it was fun to watch. And yeah, so, I mean, look, I mean, no one can verify when I changed my mind, but I did change my mind.
I find myself more and more just becoming get off my lawn guy with the fighters that I really cape up for, Frank. And it's like, I'm becoming everything that I hate because like still it's 2021 and still my favorite fighters are the Diaz brothers, Fedor, and just last week we were talking with Kevin Ioli and Ioli was like, oh, it's embarrassing that Bellator is still promoting Fedor fights. And I just kind of sulk in the corner while, the best MMA journalist in the business is saying my favorite of all time is like an insult that he's still getting promoted by a big promoter. Diaz brothers, Fedor, Overeem, like these are still my favorite fighters in 2021. Jose Aldo is up there as well. I loved watching this guy a decade ago. And Frank, speaking of nostalgia, let me take a little detour away from UFC 265 for a second. September 11th on Triller Boxing pay-per-view. 8 rounds, professional boxing. Anderson the Spider Silva against Tito Ortiz. You buying that? $45, $50 pay-per-view. And it's a boxing match, mind you. Two former MMA champions. 8 rounds of professional boxing. Are you buying that?
No. And it would be fun to find out exactly what the number is where most people would be willing to pay for that, whatever you want to call that. I mean,
these Triller events have done pretty well. Like Frank, here's what I'm learning. You in your 40s, me in my late 30s, we don't really speak for the generation of like the 24-year-old idiots who are like, they've got their dad's credit card, probably like second, third generation money. And they're like, yeah, why not, bro? Let me bet. And a lot of people I'm sure will stream it illegally. I know that's going to happen. But then I think a lot of these 20-somethings will say, yeah, why not? A boxing match between a couple former MMA champs. Giddy up.
I guess you're right. I mean, and maybe they also don't realize just how long in the tooth and short on any remaining athletic and fighting ability Tito Ortiz is. I mean, Anderson Silva is a legitimate boxer. So I'm kind of surprised, actually, that after a successful not a debut, but a successful return to boxing against Julio Chavez. Who do you fight? Chavez Jr., right?
Yeah, Chavez Jr.
Yeah. And he was successful against a real boxer, and now his next fight will be against Tito Ortiz. It's just odd to me, but Anderson Silva will tune him up. I mean, that will be maybe if it was $15 or less, I'm paying for that.
I think it's going to be like 40 or 50. Like it's going to be way
I know.
more
I
than
mean, I'm
15.
saying for me to buy it.
I got you. Well, and I do feel kind of relieved that this is the fight, because for a couple of weeks they've been talking about doing Anderson Silva Logan Paul, which now that I would rather jump off a bridge than pay for that. Like, at least, like, I have some small semblance of respect for Jake Paul. Not much, but a little bit. And
what's the difference between them? Why is that?
Jake Paul's much better. Like Jake Paul. Jake Paul actually looks like a passable professional boxer. Like,
okay.
Logan Paul is just some dude with unnaturally blonde hair who makes YouTube videos, who goes out there and collects checks for boxing. Like the younger brother, Jake, who's actually going to be fighting Tyron Woodley next month. I'm kind of interested in that. And actually Malki, who's going to be joining us in about 5 minutes, he represents Tyron. So we can talk to him a little bit about that fight. But like Jake Paul, I don't like the guy because, again, like these YouTubers, to me, and I know it's ironic, is what are we doing right now, right? But I don't know. I feel like we're respectable and the Paul brothers are not. But at least Jake Paul can box a little bit. Like Logan Paul can't. So they were talking about doing Logan Paul versus Anderson Silva. Logan Paul is the one who just fought Mayweather a couple of months ago. And like, to me, that's just a waste of time. Like, at least you get Tito in there. This is a former high-level professional fighter.
Yeah, you're sounding old. You're sounding old, Alex, because you prefaced your earlier comments by saying that I was out of touch because the young kids will pay money for this kind of crap. And I can tell you for sure they're going to make a lot more money with young kids if it's Logan Paul than if it's Tito Ortiz, who most of them probably never seen fight.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, what do you think the average age is of a Tito Ortiz super fan right now? Like 42 years old, probably. Like, they're kind of aging out.
And up.
42 and up, yeah.
And Tito Ortiz was a terrible MMA boxer.
Yeah, he was.
Right? I mean, his stand-up sucked. So now he's so I don't know what about his career would have made him feel like, I was always good with my hands in the octagon. I think I'll go into professional boxing.
Another going back to UFC 265. What's up, Alex M, who logs in on the chat? Hello, sir. Hello, good sir. I loved it. Was brief. It was short. It was awesome, though. Vicente Luque's victory over Michael Chiesa.
Oh.
Now, maybe just because the fight was quick, so it may not have lived up to the fight of the night prediction that we had for it. But you had a lot of drama in a short period of time, Frank, because Michael Chiesa, who looks so good, is striking and grappling for the first 3 minutes of that fight, he was about to submit Luque. He had Luque's back. He didn't have the second hook in. So honestly, this was one of the rare times when I thought I had a better perspective than the guys calling the fight, because the guys calling the fight were like, oh, look how close he is to a rear naked choke. He only had one hook in, so I wasn't expecting Luque to tap out, but Chiesa had two separate cracks at the rear naked, and then he was going for an arm bar briefly, and then, he goes for Luque's knees. Luque catches him in a Darce choke, so that was incredible drama, and Luque is finishing people left and right, but incredible drama in that win to go from being in some trouble, like having really bad position. Yeah. We can debate how close he was to getting submitted, but when Michael Chiesa has your back, that's not a good thing, because that dude has rear naked choked a lot of people over the years, all right? So to go from those positions to then minutes later winning the fight by submission, you had a lot of drama in one round of fighting, and that was a huge staple win for Vicente Luque.
Yeah, I thought the whole story of that fight was toughness. I thought Luque got in trouble. I thought the second choke was more of a neck crank than an actual choke in terms of how it was placed. And, in both instances, Luque was not going to quit. You could see that Luque was going to resist and fight until he either got out or he went unconscious. And when he reversed positions and got Chiesa tapped. And I really think in that instance, it was just about toughness. Luque wasn't going to be denied. And the heart of that guy, he doesn't have the athletic ability of a Michael Chiesa or most of the other top contenders in the welterweight division. But when he's huge on his heart and determination and a willingness to do whatever it takes to win, it's really impressive and it's inspiring and it makes you want to root for him. You know, I mean, you talked about fighters you put a cape on for. That's a guy. That's one of the guys for me that he's just earned my fandom. You know what I mean? You watch him and, you know, he doesn't have the superhero physique. He doesn't have the breathtaking skill in a particular discipline that everyone talks about. He's just a really tough son of a bitch. And he comes to work and he always shows up. And let me tell you, when he wants to be, his violence is really frightening. So I couldn't be a bigger fan.
I mean, he's got 2 straight Darce victories now, so that's becoming his signature move. I don't know how Chiesa wasn't more careful of that, you know. So the Chiesa win by Darce, the Tyron Woodley win before that by Darce, Randy Brown, he KO'd him with knee and punches, had a doctor stoppage over my guy Nico Price before that. So 4 straight victories, 4 straight finishes, and I think 8 of his last 10 wins are all by stoppage. So Vicente Luque, like this should be like the dream fighter for Dana White to promote, because not only is he going out there getting W after W after W, but he's usually ending these fights in pretty violent fashion. And I see something, you know, happening now with Luque. You go out there and you get a quality victory like that, Frank, you start to get hype, at least by the fans, to be, you know, a title contender. Now we know Colby Covington is the next opponent for Kamaru Usman. Do you think there might even be some interest in Vicente Luque, you know, maybe sitting on the sidelines for an extra month and a half if Dana White is so inclined to give him a title shot? Could he be the next guy? Because he's won, I think now 9 out of his last 10 fights, including 4 in a row. You could sell him as a title contender.
Absolutely, you can. I think one of the best things about him is he's new. I mean, right now, Kamaru Usman is just, he's got to go back over fighters. You know, he's fought Masvidal twice already. He's about to have fought Colby Covington twice, assuming he's victorious again. And then, all eyes are looking at Gilbert Burns and making another appearance in there against him. So it would be great to see a fresh challenge. And I don't know, it's like a Rocky Balboa Apollo Creed thing, because, you know, Kamaru Usman is like, if you created a mixed martial artist, that's what you would create. He's like a cybergenic organism. And then you just got Luque, who's probably just punching slabs of meat in a freezer box somewhere to train. He just shows up. In fact, I think he should adopt the Italian stallion gear when he walks out and everything else. I know he's not Italian. Maybe we can change it.
The Brazilian stallion?
Yeah, the Brazilian stallion. Forget about it.
Oh my God! So that was a lot of fun, that victory. I mean, what do you give? And we're expected to be joined here in the next couple of minutes by MMA and now NFL super agent Malki Kawa. So we'll keep the conversation going before he's able to log in. I mean, Frank, we talked a lot last week about, you know, this card looking like a good fight night type of card, but maybe hard to really pass as a pay-per-view. What letter grade did you give to this one, UFC 265, at the end of the day?
Oh, it was an A. I gave it an A because it was entertaining as hell. It had everything. I thought it was great. The only thing it missed was one of the 2 combatants in the main event didn't show up. But you still got to see Cyril Gane, and for casual fans, they got to see the evolution. I mean, it was contrasting eras, right, in the octagon at the same time, even though the one era didn't show up. The Tank Abbott era, represented by Derrick Lewis, and this Cyril Gane, Francis Ngannou, Stipe, you know, Junior Dos Santos, this new athletic big man era in Cyril Gane. And he's definitely taking the next step in the direction of like super athlete. You know, you remember back in the day, Alex, could we have ever imagined back in the day a George St. Pierre-esque athlete competing in the heavyweight division? The closest we could get to it was a 205er like Couture running up there to win a couple of fights. And now look, I mean, Cyril Gane is every bit the athlete that a George St. Pierre, Kamaru Usman, any of these guys are.
I like this comment from Alex on Usman. He's a hard puzzle to figure out. Might take Stephen Thompson's surprise head kick or something to take that guy out. I mean, I think the reason why a guy like Kamaru Usman is so hard to figure out is he doesn't have any weaknesses. right? I mean, the sport of mixed martial arts has evolved so quickly because it started, you can say, in 1994 with UFC 1. And for really the first 10 to 15 years of the sport's existence, it was basically you were really good at one thing. And let's see how the one thing you're really good at stacks up against the one thing this other guy is really good at, right? I mean, you could kind of take that approach all the way through the Matt Hughes era, because you remember how dominant before George St. Pierre came on the scene, how dominant of a welterweight champion Matt Hughes was, and he could really only wrestle, right? So you went from the Hoist Gracie, Matt Hughes types to then, George St. Pierre got really well-rounded really quickly. And, another guy, Frank, that we would put that label on as kind of the perfect, well-rounded athlete, and maybe he fits into the conversation of somebody who didn't really live up to that hype, is actually a Canadian gentleman who is fighting tomorrow night at the Hard Rock Hollywood for PFL, Rory MacDonald. I mean, and he's had a fine career. Like, don't get me wrong. But you remember early in the days of Rory MacDonald, I remember when he ragdolled Nate Diaz, which was kind of maybe a wake-up call that Nate Diaz shouldn't have been fighting at 170, at least not against a guy that big. But he ragdolled Nate Diaz. We used to say about Rory MacDonald, because he trained with George St. Pierre in those days, like, my God, this guy is a younger, potentially better version of George St. Pierre, because he's coming up as one of these first-generation guys who cross-trains, right? Because in the early days of the sport, you would have a guy with a great wrestling background, and then you try to kind of put lipstick on a pig and create other skills, jiu-jitsu, boxing, same thing. Whereas Rory MacDonald grew up in the sport of mixed martial arts, cross-training everything, no real weaknesses there. So maybe he hasn't lived up to that so much, but a guy like Kamaru Usman and now a guy like Cyril Gane surely is, where these guys don't really have any big-time weaknesses.
Well, and I think what you're seeing, Alex, is that the sport is big enough now that it's attracting really high-level professional athletes. I mean, Cyril Gane had a professional fighting career prior to mixed martial arts, and he's been able to translate it in because he's a very, very special athlete, and the sport is big enough now that he's willing to take that chance and make that move. And Kamaru Usman and others, I mean, it was Kamaru Usman, for example, might have been the kind of special athlete that could have pursued wrestling post-college, maybe tried to get someplace in the Olympics or something, because he's a really special athlete. He's also special in the sense that he's very big and strong for his weight, which obviously in wrestling is everything, So, but the prize, the money, the glory, the sport is so big now, we're pulling in those really special athletes. I think that's what we're seeing. But you're right, man. When Rory hit the scene, we thought that was it. We turned the corner. No longer were we going to wait for guys in their late 20s, early 30s to learn other stuff so they can be competitive in the cage. Now we get them at a young age ready to go, but it didn't prove to be the case for a while.
No, it didn't. Something else I want to get into. It's like, Frank, the Conor McGregor meltdown and downward spiral is continuing to epic proportion. Like, this guy is completely unhinged, okay? And I guess we've had signs over the years that he's not all there mentally. The various legal troubles he's been in. He's getting into bar fights. He's getting arrested down in Miami, vandalizing people's cell phones and throwing stuff away and breaking things. Like, Conor McGregor has had his issues, but he always used to handle taking losses pretty well. But I think it goes back to what we've talked about on the show is you take enough of these losses, you get your ass kicked enough times, and you start to have some of that mystique and some of that shine taken away. And now we see McGregor unraveling. Now, the latest feud that he's really accentuating is with a guy that when he fought was nowhere near McGregor's weight class, and he's retired. He's now on the announcing microphone. McGregor keeps going after Daniel Cormier. Why? Because DC had the audacity to talk about Dustin Poirier checking his kicks and that leading to McGregor breaking his leg in that recent loss to Dustin. But McGregor is refusing to budge. He's going all this stuff that he said about how he had stress fractures before the fight and like the leg was already half broken and it was he doesn't want to give Poirier any credit whatsoever for the way that fight ended. and he takes issue with DC talking about Poirier checking McGregor's kicks. Here are some of the tweets that McGregor put out there. And he does the gutless move where he'll tweet out some trash and delete it. And by the way, DC has also rightfully gone after Conor for the really insensitive tweets that he made about Khabib Nurmagomedov, where, you know, he poked fun at Khabib's father passing away from COVID, which is one of the scummiest things a human being can do, to poke fun at somebody's father dying. So McGregor tweets out before deleting them, Daniel Cormier is a fat mess, getting into worse condition by the day. God bless him, showing up drunk at media events the very day before he was in the booth calling my fight. Drunk at a media event, working the day before, being a commentator on the biggest fight in history. It is a sackable offense, wrote McGregor, for a commentator to be drunk at press work the day before commentating the big fight. Dreadful. Get it together. Belching in the mic at a press event and all, like WTF, the day before commentating the big fight. Is this guy serious? Disgraceful, he says. Your back situation's just mental too. Your weight and way of life is abysmal. That's a funny line. Your weight and way of life is abysmal, he said. And now drunk at work the day before you commentate a McGregor fight. Pitiful. Congrats, John, on his head kick KO anniversary over you. Good always defeats evil. Wasn't sure you were evil. Fakes. Now, Frank, he kept referencing DC drinking. DC had like a friendly drinking segment on the pre-fight show for the UFC the day prior with one of his colleagues. Like it was a whole setup thing. And so to me, that's really unprofessional by McGregor to make it sound like DC is some kind of an alcoholic when he was drinking for some corny UFC feature on the pre-fight show. Like McGregor has completely lost it.
Yeah, I mean, look, who cares? Like, you know, McGregor is just trying desperately to keep himself in the conversation and try to maintain some kind of relevance and interest with fans. Because as you correctly pointed out at the top of your comments there, you know, once you get beat up a few times, you know, the shine is off interest in seeing you fight again. And, you know, he's watching it slip away. That's why he lashed out so viciously at Dustin Poirier and did not exhibit his normal, you know, good behavior when losing conduct in that last fight, because he could see right then that it was over. I would love for guys like Daniel Cormier, even Khabib. I think Khabib has the discipline to do this. Certainly Dustin Poirier. Just ignore what he says. Just don't respond to it. Treat him as the irrelevant person that he is. He's a has-been in the UFC unless he returns back to featherweight, where I think he could be a force to be reckoned with if he gets back to the weight class in which he had some power advantages, etc. But otherwise, I wouldn't respond. That's what he wants. He wants the response. He wants us talking about it on the show. But you know, who would you match him up against in the top 10 where you would pick him as a clear favorite? And you have to think about that for a second too, which is even troubling to start with. Maybe Justin Gaethje.
The styles, right. to me, that's the sort of matchup he needs, right? And maybe even Michael Chandler, because Chandler, he's a great wrestler, but he's the type who gets like sucked into the whole thing of, no, I'd rather just stand up and bang. So I don't even know if Chandler would attempt to take down. So it would have to be two guys like that, like high action strikers, because then that gives McGregor the puncher's chance and you're fighting his game. But, you know, anyone in the top half of that division who has any wrestling prowess and enough discipline in their game planning to use it is going to easily expose this guy. So
and has ever watched a tape of him fight. Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you're right.
If I were Conor McGregor, I would focus on picking fights with Diaz brothers. Like, seriously. And
well, that's his money fight that's left. You're absolutely right.
And after I fight Nate again, win or lose, I call out Nick, who's coming back. So we know that Nick Diaz is interested in fighting again. He's fighting Robbie Lawler. And I would imagine Nick Diaz would probably be interested in the big payday that comes from it. Even if Conor McGregor is completely washed up by that time, still a big payday would come with that. So if I'm Conor McGregor, I'm not focusing on Dustin Poirier, who is just going to kick my ass again. I'm not focusing on any of the Dagestanis who are in that division, because Khabib has disciples and relatives like Islam Makhachev who are fighting their way up through the ranks. And we know Conor doesn't have a prayer against anyone whose last name ends in the letters EV. The guy does not have a prayer, EV or OV. He's not going to beat any of these dudes out of Dagestan. So if I'm McGregor and I'm focusing on money fights, I'm trying to get Dana White to let me box again. That's one thing he can do. And then if I'm staying in the octagon, I want to fight Nate again, and I want to fight Nick. Because as much as I love the Diaz brothers, yeah, Conor, of course, has a chance to beat both of them. He's 1-1 against Nate. Nick Diaz hasn't fought since 2015, so I don't know what Nick is going to look like when he returns. Focus on the Diaz brothers because you can make money and you can possibly win those fights.
But honestly, does he have any path back to glory legitimately? The way the league is evolved. Okay, so why is he even doing this?
Money.
God knows he doesn't need the money, Alex. I mean, he's been paid. I mean, he just made a fortune on that Proper 12 whiskey.
Proper number 12.
I mean, he's really made a lot of money. He's done very well for himself with that. So I'm not sure what's happening here. This must be some crisis of ego.
Yeah.
Because, fighting Nate and fighting Nick, you're right about that. Those are the fights he could line up. But for what purpose? Especially if they both beat him. Then he's lost any post-fight, post-career marketability that he might still be holding on to.
By the way,
every time he says something, crappy, like he's been saying, he erodes more and more of the mainstream marketing machinery that might get behind something he's doing. Because, I mean, this is we live in the pitchfork millennium, right? The social media pitchforkers. You say the wrong thing to the wrong person, and everybody's feelings are hurt, and you're gone. And he does that.
How has he not been
basis.
canceled? How has he not been canceled yet, by the way? Because now, like Frank, nowadays, you can't even poke fun at somebody's weight without getting canceled.
Right.
How has he not been canceled for fat shaming, right? When he says the things he said about Cormier, how is Conor not being canceled for fat shaming? Because I've seen it happen before. It's why, and I'm a nice guy in general, don't get me wrong. But on Twitter, I am the nicest guy on planet Earth because I have seen people poke fun at people's weight, poke fun at what people are wearing, and they get canceled. Not me, bros. I am nice. I'm not interested in that sort of action.
Well, see, I could do that because I have no followers, so no one would catch me. But you're right.
Fair.
He evades it, and I don't know. Maybe you get a pass. I mean, comedians get a pass, don't they? Usually. That cat from
These
SNL
days,
just got lit
dude,
up.
I see people try to cancel Joe Rogan weekly. Like, weekly, people try to cancel that guy.
And he says, go ahead and cancel me. I'll just go home with my $100 million.
Right. Oh man! By the way, I don't know what happened to Malki Kawa. Like I'm still hoping he connects. We had confirmed several times before the show. I don't know if he's having James Walker type connection issues or what the deal is. But if he's able to connect, we will bring him on as soon as he logs in, Frank. So I don't know what's going on there because I wanted to talk with him about Tyron. I wanted to talk to him about who Derrick Lewis might fight next. So we're hoping we can track the man down. And you know what, Frank? When you're in a business like he's representing NFL players. It's a busy time of year. Who knows what kind of call he might be on right now. Now, we are going to be joined at 7 o'clock by Johnathan Ramlakhan here from the 5 Reasons Sports Network. So we can talk a little PFL coming up, recap some UFC with him. But if Malki is able to connect, we will go to him as soon as he is around. Now, Frank, what is your interest level for PFL tomorrow night? Because I'm digging it. I think the presentation has been really good. I'm looking forward to watching Rory MacDonald fight Ray Cooper tomorrow night. I think it's an interesting matchup. And also, it's worth noting, this is one of the rare weekends where, and it wouldn't be on Friday anyway, but I need to get my MMA fix. And this is one of those rare weekends. We don't have a UFC show this weekend. I did a double take when I looked at the calendar and I saw there's nothing until August 21st because typically they're full go 52 freaking weeks a year. So PFL, that's my option this week.
Yeah, I mean, look, my interest is piqued for the exact reason that they're signing Rory MacDonald was a good idea. Because of Rory MacDonald. He's a great talent, and I'll be interested to see how he performs. I admittedly don't know much about his opponent, but, I do know that Rory MacDonald is one of those mysteries for me because he had everything that you need to have to be a successful champion in the UFC, and just the stars didn't align correctly. And then he had that Robbie Lawler fight where I feel like years were taken off both men's careers.
God, I'm glad you reminded me of that. That was wild.
That was something. I mean, it's one of those fights I'll never forget. And to see him, continuing to press forward after that is impressive. That was almost I've got to retire after this kind of fight. That was an Ali Frazier kind of fight, man.
Yeah, and it just like when you see wars like that, and Rory MacDonald was like mid-20s when he was having those fights, and just the mileage it can put on somebody, man. Sometimes you have wars like that, and you're just never really the same. And it's actually kind of a minor miracle that Robbie Lawler is still fighting at a semi-high level, because his career has been defined by wars like that, because that guy has taken a ton of punishment over the years. You would never know that Robbie Lawler actually came from a wrestling background, because I haven't seen the guy attempt to wrestle since like 2003.
Well, no, but it's a really brilliant way that they kind of set his career up in the beginning, right? Because when you are a good wrestler, if they can teach you lots of other things, you can fight looser and use those other disciplines with greater relaxation, because you're ready for that takedown. The people that don't have that wrestling base, there's always that hesitancy, the punching just short, or not wanting to throw that kick necessarily because they're waiting for that takedown. They're not quite sure how they're going to defend it. So I always think that, you see it now. We were talking earlier about Kamaru Usman and how good he is. And really the way Colby Covington strikes. I'm so excited about that upcoming fight, because both those guys exhibit talents that are enunciated by their ability to negate a very big component of the game. You're not taking Kamaru Usman down. He's not, no one's going to take him down. So he can fight accordingly,
By the way, this is such a good example that Alex writes in. Junior Dos Santos was never the same after Cain Velasquez. I mean, Frank, the second and third fights against Cain, he was beaten seemingly within inches of his life. Like those were absolute wars, but one-sidedly in favor of Cain. Like sometimes it's better to be finished than to be beaten over the course of 5 rounds. Like I'll remember an example of that, Frank. Do you remember? Of course you do. When Randy Couture, moved up to heavyweight to like save the heavyweight division, when Tim Sylvia was the champion, and he was just really tall, and
those are dark days. Those are dark days.
Really dark days. Like the heavyweight division was finished. Tim Sylvia was the champion. He was winning fights because he was really tall, no athleticism whatsoever. And Randy Couture decided, I'm going to move up to heavyweight and save the division. And a lot of people just had doubts because everyone else was losing to Tim Sylvia. So people had doubts about Randy Couture. And you remember early in that fight, Couture cracked him, nearly finished the fight, but didn't. And he just ended up kicking Tim Sylvia's butt for 5 rounds. And I remember Randy Couture saying after the fight, and I think this was like 2006, 2007. So at that time, I hadn't really thought about it, because usually you're thinking, oh, guy finishes fight, you win by knockout submission. That's way more impressive than winning a decision. But what Randy Couture said after that fight was, I'm actually glad I beat this guy over the course of 5 rounds, because nobody can think it was a fluke, right? I mean, if Couture had just cracked Sylvia, put him away in a minute and a half, then people might say, oh, well, he just beat him. He landed a great punch and he put him away. It was a fluke. It would never happen if they fought again. Like the fact that Couture put a sustained, thorough, dominant beating on him over the course of 5 rounds actually answered more of those questions. And I felt the same way about Cain Velasquez, when he won that rematch against Junior Dos Santos, because it eliminated any doubt. Because the first time they fought, it was so hyped, and it was just so disappointing the way it played out so quickly. Because the first time that Cain fought Junior, that was the UFC's very first network TV event. They were just starting the Fox deal. And Dana White made what I thought was a horrible decision to just do one fight on TV. Because
there were other good fights on that card.
There was like Clay Guida, Benson Henderson was on that card. Right. And he's like, no, that's going to be only streaming on Facebook. You remember when the UFC used to stream prelims on Facebook? No. Clay Guida, Benson Henderson, that's just going to be streaming on Facebook. We're just going to have one fight on Fox, and it's going to be the heavyweight title fight. And then the heavyweight title fight lasted 61 seconds because Junior cracked Cain. A little bit fluky, was proven to be a fluke in the next 2 fights, put him away early. And it's like, oh, man, all that buildup for literally 61 seconds of fighting. But yeah, I mean, sometimes if you thoroughly outclass your opponent over the course of 5 rounds, that's actually more of a statement than, beating your opponent quickly. And Alex writes in, I remember that Fox deal. Looking back, going with Fox is 100% a Dana White decision. You know what's funny about that Fox deal? That started in late 2011 was when that started. Do you remember what a big deal that felt like? That it felt like the sport is mainstream now is what it felt like.
Yeah, it was the validation of it. I mean, getting on Spike TV and being on something that you could find on your cable box is one thing, but hearing the familiar voices of Fox NFL Sundays talking about the UFC and the fights that are coming up legitimize it. It was a complete coming out from the shadows and the alleys and saying, no, we're here. We're fans of the sport. And there's a lot of us. So that was a really, really big moment. And Fox was the network that was willing to do it. And they've always been an edgy network, right? So it made sense that it would be them that ushered them in. And we knew where it was going to end up. We knew it would ultimately end up with ESPN. So it all played out, but it all started with Fox.
Well, and it's like we're kind of reaching a point now where whatever TV channel you're on doesn't really seem to matter that much. It's like, I don't know, like 10 years ago, just something felt magical about you're on every TV set in the country, right? Because even if somebody didn't have cable, they might have the rabbit ears, and like every TV is able, to get on Fox, right? Whereas now it's like, it doesn't really matter if you're even on TV, if you're streaming, because the UFC now, Frank, they do some events on actual ESPN, but most of their events are just, online, right? I mean, ESPN Plus isn't, you can stream it through your TV if you have that technology, which most of us do by this point, but it's an online stream now. Even the pay-per-views are online stream.
I'm old, Alex. Can I ask you a question about ESPN Plus streaming? Yeah. When I turn on a streaming ESPN Plus UFC Fight Night card, when there's a break in the action and it says there's a commercial happening, but I can't see it, who is seeing it? Because it's a streaming network.
Maybe another country. That might be like BT Sport in the UK or something.
These are domestic fights. Yeah. I've always been baffled by that because it feels like I'm streaming something that might be running on the West Coast or something, and I'm not seeing like the local Midas commercial or something. But I just always wondered why can't I see the commercial?
By the way, I can't be the only person who's getting tired of that Justin Gaethje, Michael Chiesa commercial, which I think is some kind of a tequila commercial. But it's like, I don't know, like I've seen it 100 times, and yet all I can think about is they're like nose to nose walking through Chiesa's entire house. It's like, how many thousands of times do I have to watch that commercial?
Well, it can't be as many times as we suffered through Stipe's firefighting career as he drank a Modelo at the bar in Cleveland. That one, I saw that one 10,000 times.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know what. I mean, I do think that some of the events for us that only stream in Brazil and in parts of Europe, Japan, maybe are actually on TV. So maybe there's a commercial going on somewhere, even if it's not going on in our houses, man. So
I always wondered, man. I just had to. Yeah, I had to pick your brain. I just always wondered.
So you know what's funny? I'm reading some comments from the Fat Mess, Daniel Cormier. He was asked a question, Frank. Who do you predict his answer was when he was asked the question, who can give Cyril Gane the most problems in the octagon? Who do you think he went with his answer?
I didn't see this answer, so I'm legitimately guessing. Yeah, I'm legitimately guessing. I'm going to say he said Stipe.
He actually said John Jones. But it's funny that he's saying John Jones, not Francis Ngannou, not Stipe Miocic, because that would be a bad answer as well.
Yeah, not the current or former champion, but a guy who's yet to debut in the division.
Yeah, so he thinks, and I guess this is phrased a little bit as a leading question, okay? Because he was asked for the man who can match Cyril Gane's athleticism. So I guess that doesn't mean Ngannou can't.
That would have changed. That would have changed my answer, though. Yeah, that would have changed my answer. I think that Cyril Gane is as long as John Jones. One of the things that we've got used to seeing in John Jones' dominance in the light heavyweight division is the fact that he's just so much longer than his opponents.
74.5-inch reach.
Yeah, he can just control that. I mean, it's akin to a LeBron James kind of reach, and it looks by the looks of him, I think Cyril Gane's going to be proximate to that, plus naturally heavier. So it would be a spectacular. I can't wait for John Jones to get in the division. I just can't wait for it.
Same here. All right, so we're going to go out to the guest line. We have our good pal Johnathan Ramlakhan, who's at 3-Piece Combo on Twitter. Huge part of the fight coverage here on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Good evening, Johnathan. How you doing, sir?
Dude, I'm doing great, man. You gave me the opportunity of going to my first professional MMA fight, so I really want to thank you for that. I want to let everybody know watching that you gave me this opportunity, so I appreciate you letting me going out there and do that. We also got the biggest fight show for the most views, at least so far, that we've been doing. We got 800 plus on those shows, all thanks to my man Frank for showing up. So because of his beautiful face, we got that showing up as well. So, man, it's a great week. I cannot ask for much more. I'm excited to go tomorrow and see a couple of fights. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. And you know what? That reminds me, the nickname that I used to have for Frank was Frankie Ratings. The man brings the numbers. He brings the views. He brings the listenership. This man brings the freaking ratings. And yeah, Johnathan is going to be out there. I think he and James will both be out there tomorrow night. I'm going to be at the next 2 PFL events, but my 3-year-old is sick, so I've got to take care of him tomorrow night. So I'll be joining you guys out there for the next 2 events, but Jonathan's going to be out there at PFL tomorrow night. And what's your expectation for that, Johnathan? Because I'm looking forward to watching. I will be watching on ESPN2 tomorrow when Rory MacDonald takes on Ray Cooper. And I know that Rory, he was robbed on the judges' scorecards when he fought Gleison Tebow. Like it was absurd. So I hope he gets better treatment here in Florida than he got in New Jersey, because Rory even said he's never fighting in New Jersey again out of protest for that ridiculous judging. So I hope if it gets to the scorecards, and I think it might, I hope Rory gets better treatment from the judges down here, Johnathan.
Yeah, to touch on your point with that fight was probably one of the worst robberies that I've seen. He clearly destroyed him the first 2 rounds. Like, it wasn't even close. They used Verdict MMA, which I'm a huge fan of because it allows the fan to get in there as well. And they also had the strikes. I'm pretty sure it was around 80-something to 30. I think he outstriked him by 50. So absolutely absurd there. I'm actually really excited about it. It's a playoff format, so it's a little bit different from what we're getting normally in another, kind of fights. We know who's going to be fighting who at the end of the night. These 4 guys, 2 guys are going to match up with each other, and we're going to get them fighting for $1 million. And as well as for the prelims, there's a couple of guys with some pretty good records that have a bright future. PFL likes to get some of those Russian guys. I know Donno is a big fan of those guys as well. So PFL does a good job getting some of those Russian guys, one of which who is fighting in the playoffs as well. So I'm looking forward to it tomorrow. I think it's going to be some good action, and I think we have a good card ahead of us.
Do you I'm sorry, Alex.
No,
do you guys think, I mean, look, in a league where you have a lot of fighters, admittedly, who don't have the kind of casual fan, attention, a format like that works really well, right? Because, the prize is what draws you in. Who can get the prize? And I hear a lot of fighters talking about the purity of it. There's no gamesmanship. I don't have to talk crap on Twitter to get a fight. I'm lined up, I'm in a bracket, and this is how it should be. But should it really be that way? Like, should the UFC do something like that? Would that be a successful venture?
The thing is, they don't need to, though. Like the UFC,
well, I know they don't need to, but I'm just asking, if something like that would be interesting in a league like the UFC.
I think with the UFC, a part of what makes the UFC is the characters that come along, right? These characters come here and they make their names from themselves and they surpass the sport, right? You see guys that come in the sport and they surpass just MMA. Now, if you want to watch something with the purity of the sport, I agree. PFL is definitely something that you want to watch because, like you said, you go out there, you get your wins, you get your losses. If you get a first round finish, you'll get some extra points. So you want to go out there, you want to get that, you want to qualify for the playoffs. So I think it's a really good, change of pace from the UFC. I think what the UFC has right now, they're developing stars, so it's a little bit different. But with PFL, it's a different change of pace, and I love to see it.
It's funny. Alex asks, "Who's the last Dagestani to take an L?" There was one within the last couple of months, and I can't remember who it was. It wasn't Islam Makhachev, obviously, because he hasn't lost in a long time. But it's like the only reason why I remember this is I bet on basically every fight. and I never knowingly bet against a Dagestani, but there was one who did lose like 6 or 7 weeks ago. And I remember, because I think that card I went like 0 for 6 on my bets. And I was like, of course, even the freaking Dagestanis are losing tonight. Like I can't get any sort of victory. But honestly, if you were to, Johnathan, if you were to like compile, and you know what, I could probably do this if I have enough free time. But if you were to go through like every Dagestani fight on the UFC's roster and come up with the combined record, it's probably like 104 wins and like 5 losses. Like it's got to be something crazy. Like these guys do not lose on a regular basis.
So actually, to your point, I found this thing a long time ago. It's a chart, and I'm going to have to pull it up for you afterwards, but I think collectively, oh, there it is. 87% of their fights, Dagestani's winner. So you have Khabib. This is a little behind. So I think this was about a year ago. So I had Khabib at 27-0. You had Shamil Gamzatov, 13-0. Omar Nurmagomedov, I think he's fighting in Bellator, 8-0. Yeah. Obviously, we have Islam, 17-1. Zabit, 17-1. Islam Mamedov. And I mean, you go down the whole list, 79% of their fights are wins collectively. 87% at some points, or at some different, the numbers are a little weird depending on how you look at them now versus a year or two ago, but that's a ridiculous number. That's 4 out of every fights they're winning, and usually they're losing, one of their first 3 fights, because that's where they'll take that learning loss, right? And then they'll go on that big run.
And there's usually, Frank, there's not a whole lot of value in betting Dagestanis because they're usually like 4-1, 5-1, 6-1 favorites. So it's like the time that I place those bets, it's either some kind of a prop where I get better odds, or I'm having a tough start to the night and I'm chasing. So I'm like, you know what? Let me bet big money on the Dagestani to win a little bit back. Like that's usually the situation.
But I'll ask both of you, what is it about them? That is it that Sambo is really a dominant discipline when it's mastered correctly in mixed martial arts? Or what is the answer to this?
There's got to be something to that, Johnathan, because you think about how dominant Fedor was in his prime, and he came from the very high level Sambo background. So there's got to be something to that. Also, I don't know if this is necessarily the largest factor, but there's got to be something said culturally, from coming from, a country where you've got a hard life. It's been war torn throughout your childhood, more than likely, depending on when you were born. There's always, it's a hard life compared to what some of us are used to. So I just mentally, they've got a certain fortitude that a lot of Western fighters just don't have. Because for a lot of Western fighters, they're thinking, you know what? If I have to tap out right here, it's not a big deal. I'm still making, 6 figures. I can still go home to my family and to my cush mansion. It's not a big deal. Where these Dagestanis are like, dude, I literally grew up wrestling bears, and I grew up, hiding from bullets and wars. So I think that's a whole different attitude that they have.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, dude, that mental fortitude is on another level. The way they're able to push themselves past the point, it's combine that with the combat sambo, it's a really hard matchup to have, because these guys are stronger beyond what their weight class are. They'll kind of stick onto you like glue, and it's kind of like quick stand, because once he grabs your hand, then you try to use your legs or something to kick away, and now he has your hands in your legs, and all of a sudden you're at the bottom getting triangle choked from the top. So it's a really hard style to fight against, and I think it's a combination of both. Like you said, Donno, man, these fighters here, if we were to, somebody were just to stop fighting about 26, 27 years old, okay, you can go to college, you can get a job. It's a lot easier to just have a fallback plan. And if you're not going to become a fighter over there, if you're not becoming a fighter, you're going to have, like you said, a very tough life. And this is an escape for them, right? This is something that allows for them to have a better life, put themselves in a better position to, look at Khabib now meeting, the prime minister, I think, of Russia, whatever they call it up there. But, he's put himself in a spot, and that's inspiring the next level. And Khabib is doing his job as well as being that coach to help push these young guys ahead.
And also, to me, like Frank, it's such a beautiful story of what Khabib is now doing as coach. And for all the MMA awards, I mean, you have the big MMA award show at the end of the year. I'm sure there's like 100 smaller ones that try to piggyback. He should be clean sweep coach of the year. Like Khabib should be the coach of the year. And the primary reason why he's doing it is because he's carrying on the legacy of his father. Because his father, may he rest in peace, was his coach, was the coach of all his teammates and relatives. And like this Khabib is such a good dude. Like he's like carrying on the family traditions. Like my father passed away. Khabib actually thinks it's more important, to actually take on his father's mantle as coach versus keep fighting and making, paydays for stepping into the octagon. Like he wants to carry on his dad's legacy. And so far, so good because his teammates are not losing.
I think that's probably the most intimidating part of this Dagestani MMA story. You take somebody like Khabib, whose career is maybe arguably one of the greatest we've ever seen in the sport, and it's just a small piece of their actual plan.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing that scares the crap out of me. I mean, his Hall of Fame career is just a piece of what we're actually got going on here. Soon we will be in all the divisions. Soon we will be dominating everyone. Soon we will have to literally walk a damn bear in there to face one of these guys because I don't think anyone else can.
Well, I'd like to quote our guy.
Practice. Yeah.
I would quote our guy Al from 3 yards per carry. You have to give him a billy club to go and fight with these guys.
Yeah, it's going to get to that point pretty soon. Jonathan, I want to circle back to UFC 265. How would you handicap Cyril Gane versus Francis Ngannou? Because we're expecting that to be the next fight. And I talked about this with Frank near the top of the show. I think Frank and I are both going to be picking Francis, but they did used to train together in France. They were part of the same team. And you get some of this mythology. You hear some of these stories about Cyril Gane giving Ngannou a lot of trouble in training and a lot of trouble in sparring. Now, they've gone on different paths, and Francis is certainly a better fighter now than he was a few years ago, but Cyril Gane probably is as well. So how much do you take that into account, and how would you handicap Gane versus Ngannou?
Well, I wouldn't take that too much into account because we've seen Francis grow exponentially as a fighter. I mean, he came into the UFC not even being able to speak English, right? He had the cornrows coming down. Remember when Joe Rogan was trying to interview him, he didn't even know what he was asking him at first. And now he's speaking English just as a person and as a fighter. This man has developed immensely. And I definitely have to say the same for Cyril Gane. I mean, 10 fights into his MMA career, of course he has other types of combat experience as well, but only 10 fights into his MMA career, he's already the interim heavyweight champion, defeating the guy with the most knockouts in heavyweight history in Derrick Lewis. So he's definitely in good position. And as far as breaking it down or handicapping the event, I still have to give the edge to Francis Ngannou. He's not on that level. The only thing that's ever stopped Francis.
Hold on. Let me. Oh man, I totally, dude, man. I totally missed this. 8 minutes ago, Manny wrote that Malki was backstage. Is he still there? I totally missed that message, Manny. Let me know if he's still there. Put him on. I totally missed that. I don't know if he dipped out, but Malki was backstage 8 minutes ago. So I'm waiting for word from Manny. I didn't want to keep.
It doesn't look like it. I can see it right now. It doesn't look like he's there.
Okay. All right. So
Jonathan, I agree with what you just said. That the thing also, and you and I talked about it a few nights ago. Cyril Gane is awesome, but if you had any reservations about a Cyril Gane and matching up with Ngannou before the Derrick Lewis fight, you should still have it because we didn't really get to see him in an actual fight, and that's frustrating because as good as he looked, Derrick Lewis did nothing. So. And I don't think that had as much to do with Cyril Gane as we'd like to think. I think that had a lot to do also with some other issues he was dealing with during fight week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that. I don't know if you guys saw the picture. My friend actually sent it to me. Shout out to my boy Chris. He sent it to me a picture of Derrick Lewis eating wings and ribs before the 5-round fight. I'm not sure if that was true, but that's what I saw today. But yeah, handicapping that event, the only thing that'll stop Francis Ngannou from throwing the punch would be power, right? And we saw that with the Francis versus Derrick Lewis fight, right? Other than that, he does not care. Like, he'll go out there swinging, and we saw Cyril Gane have to run from Derrick Lewis when he opened up. How long is he going to run from Francis Ngannou, a guy who's going to be out there at least putting some shots in your face? He's learning how to throw a jab. I mean, he's working with Kamaru Usman. This guy could be even better than what we saw from him last time. So it's crazy to think about that, but I still think Ngannou gets it done.
Jonathan, do you think that Cyril Gane could knock out Ngannou? Because Alex and I were talking earlier that, really it's the kind of fight where Cyril Gane's the better striker, the better well-rounded striker, kicks, everything else. but he can't make a single mistake was our argument. Whereas I think Ngannou could make a few mistakes. He could get cracked a few times and probably eat it.
Yeah, I think it's a very dangerous thing because we saw with the Stipe fight what caused Stipe to get knocked out. Stipe knocked Ngannou, actually rocked him. Then Stipe got a little over aggressive and then he got knocked out, right? So now we have to worry about that with Cyril Gane because we know that Francis can take some shots. He can eat some shots as well. So how many, as far as an accumulation of shots, is it going to take for Cyril Gane to knock out Francis? I think if it would be a knockout, it wouldn't be out cold. It would kind of be something like we saw with Derrick Lewis. It would probably be more low leg kick heavy, right? He'd probably try to take away the movement from the giant Ngannou, try to move around him. And, once he's able to back him up and maybe just have him fold over from some uppercuts and some body shots, something kind of like that where the referee is forced to stop it. But I don't see the position where Cyril Gane goes out there and knocks Francis out like how he did to Overeem.
By the way, I saw Alex asking if there were odds out. So, and I never bet fights this early, especially a fight we don't even have a date yet for. But it is interesting because the fight opened actually with Cyril Gane as a favorite at about minus 190. And now the last I checked, when that came out, a lot of people started pouring money in on Francis, which I probably would have done as well at plus 110. And I think they're both minus 110. So it's a pick'em fight, which is it's kind of wild to me. I mean, what would you chalk that down to? I mean, Frank, I'll ask you first. Like, is it really now we say that the story's out of training and Cyril Gane just being so well-rounded, having such great footwork, or is this recency bias? Because like we just watched Cyril Gane a couple of days ago.
Unfortunately, it's recency bias, and it's also like the sharps don't know this game yet. You can see it in a lot of the lines that come out. They just don't. It's not like football and baseball. They just don't know. That's why there's a lot of money to be made gambling in this sport because you see some really dumb odds. I just think Derrick Lewis beat Francis Ngannou and Cyril Gane just TKO'd Derrick Lewis, so of course he's the favorite. It's a stupid methodology, but that's really all they got in Vegas right now for the UFC.
Johnathan, what would you do now if you're Dana White with Vicente Luque? Because he's on an absolute tear, 4 in a row. He's won like 9 of his last 10 fights. He's finishing fights now. Is there any chance that he might be given an opportunity to sit around and then fight, the Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman winner? And I guess it would have to be Usman because if Covington beats him, you probably run that one back immediately. But do you think maybe he could sit around for the next title shot or does he stay active now?
I think it's really hard for him to do that because, and I mean, he's one of my favorite fighters and I would love to be biased here, but you look at somebody like Leon Edwards and sure, you can say that last minute of that fight against Nate Diaz maybe lost him that title shot, right? What he's supposed to have because it really didn't make him look good, but you can't really put Luque over somebody like Leon Edwards right now because of the body of work that Leon Edwards does, right? And, somebody like Gilbert Burns, it's kind of the same level, right? Sure, Gilbert Burns already lost to Kamaru, but he's gotten, was it one win? I know he beat Wonder Boy. Did he beat anybody else after he lost to?
No, it's just Wonder Boy.
So just Wonder Boy. And he's been calling other people out as well, right? He's not calling for that championship shot just yet. So I think it would be between him and Leon Edwards. And I think for both guys, make a title contender shot, right? Have that be the co-main event to the Covington versus Usman fight. The winner, granted it's Usman, is going to fight Usman.
Wow. So a couple of interesting comments. Alex wrote in, Gane currently minus 130, Vegas favorite. Michael writes in a couple things. How's Francis with checking kicks? Could that be a big factor? I don't think we've seen a lot of that from him. Overall, he looked incredibly well-rounded against Stipe last time out, but I can't recall seeing Francis check too many kicks, so I guess that could be a factor. Michael also writes in, agreed about Leon Edwards. He's been doing work. Yeah, although I still think, man, if we could have just done 6 more rounds, Nate Diaz would have gotten it done there. So it's like, Diaz didn't lose that fight to Leon. He ran out of time, okay?
Oh, my God. Will you
take that for what you will.
Apologist. I'll tell you what, Nate Diaz is just a nightmare. It's amazing to me that anyone takes a fight like that, especially a guy like Leon who's lining up for a title shot. I mean, that's just. I hope he got a buttload of money for that fight because it's all risk and very little reward.
Dustin is calling him out now too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good business fighting these guys. Alex writes, just keep making interim title fights. He probably knows how much we hate those interim title fights. Like I have a Crusade 11-round fight. That's what I'm saying, man. Because Diaz was finally coming on in the 5th round. If you had done 6 more rounds, he would have taken it 6-5 on the scorecard.
Alex, boxing has 800 weight divisions, right? And the UFC has an appropriate number of weight divisions and 8,000 belts.
Yeah,
so, they both have problems.
Yeah, no doubt about that. What about Johnathan? Your take on Jose Aldo? Because I love my guy Frank flip-flopping, because before the card, Frank is telling me, "Oh, Aldo's 100 years old. He's got all that mileage. The guy's finished." And then he goes out there and he does work against Pedro Munoz. And then Frank is tweeting, "Guys, I called it all along. Jose Aldo, I've been backing him all along." But that was a huge win, and a win I didn't think he was going to get.
Yeah, I mean, going into that fight, he had a very tough challenge in front of him in Pedro Munoz, and the way he was able to just let everything go perfectly, it felt like it came naturally to him. One, he looked in great shape. I feel like the weight cut is getting to him a lot better now. He's making that cut a lot easier. He looks really good in there. He was able to check a lot of those leg kicks from Munoz, which is a staple of Munoz's game, so he's able to do that, and his striking was just money, and you can just tell that man is built for 5 rounds now. I can see him doing maybe a fight night main event against, Frank was offering TJ Dillashaw on our last video. You can do him against TJ Dillashaw, or maybe even go put him against Sanhagen, right? So there's a couple of options right there that can main event a fight night. And he's ready for 5 rounds, because you looked at that 3rd round after, being very technical and savvy and just being really slick defensively as well. He started ripping some shots going to the body, going to the head, letting some of those leg kicks going. They're saying that he's been working more just straight on this boxing, but you can see a little bit more because he hasn't been throwing quite as much of those leg kicks like he used to in his prime day. But man, his striking looks slick. He looks fast. He looks really good defensively. His movement is really well, and he's primed for another title push. He gets another win, and he's fighting for the belt.
Yeah, it's crazy to think of that. On the way out here, Johnathan, Frank already completely poo-pooed this boxing match we have coming up. Triller, I mean, talk about the integrity of the events that Triller are putting on. We get to watch 8 rounds of professional boxing between Anderson Silva and Tito Ortiz. Now, my take, Johnathan, this is a lot better than Anderson Silva versus Logan Paul, which we've been talking about for quite some time. So I feel like this is, when it comes to the integrity of combat sports, I feel like this is a step up. Anderson Silva boxing Tito Ortiz. Are you buying that?
I mean, yeah, right? Yeah, I'm buying it for sure.
You're watching
I'm
it.
definitely going to be watching it.
You were right, Alex. You were right.
I'll definitely be watching that for sure. I love all these clown shows, man. Clown shows are good for the sport. They draw eyes to the sport. I mean, my niece, she's 8. She's going to be 9, but she was only 8 years old asking me about the Jake Paul fight when I was watching the fight on my phone. Like, I had no idea what boxing was or MMA was at 8 years old, watching Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon. So, it gets a bigger audience into it. So I'm a fan of it, whether it's, really good for the purity of the sport, definitely not, but I'm there for getting more publicity.
Yeah. It's a good way to look at it because, Frank, I can remember over the years when, like, anytime there was going to be a freak show fight made, like I remember when James Toney fought Randy Couture. Even more recently when CM Punk fought a few times in the octagon, it's like the one thing, and I don't have to like it, okay? But the one thing is, you hear some people saying this is going to kill the sport. Like, oh my God, like if we let CM Punk get into the octagon, it's over. Like we're out of business. We're done. We're finished. And those fears are unfounded. Like, I don't have to respect CM Punk as a mixed martial arts fighter, and he obviously wasn't good at it. I didn't have to respect, lazy at the time, very overweight pro boxer James Toney with no MMA training fighting Randy Couture. Like, I didn't have to respect it, but we can stop pretending that these freak show fights are going to kill combat sports, because there is an audience for it. Like, clearly there is an audience for it when Logan Paul is putting up big numbers. Like, obviously there is an audience for this.
I agree with you, but I don't want to see it in the UFC. So like you referenced the CM Punk fight, because that for me erodes the professionalism of the sport. You know, Logan Paul isn't going to take a snap as a tight end for the Chicago Bears on a shtick because it'll sell more seats in the stadium. That would be an aberration. It would never happen. And it shouldn't happen in the UFC. But if they want to go on one of these other silly promotions and do these kinds of things, then no problem. You know, if an NFL player wants to try to tackle a fan who wins a contest on some other, you know, network for shtick, then that's great. But it shouldn't happen in the UFC. That's where I have a problem. Maybe I'm getting old, but I just, you know, the CM Punk thing, that whole exercise bothered me because it's a professional sport. You can't wake up one morning, train for 8 months in Milwaukee, and then all of a sudden you're an MMA fighter. It doesn't work that way. And he was exposed for it. But the fact that the UFC kept trying it pissed me off.
You know, this is actually a great point brought up in the chat. Didn't Brock Lesnar play football? He did training camp with the Minnesota Vikings. Like we came that close to the NFL freak show fight, right? Because like did Brock, like I'm assuming at some point in Brock Lesnar's life he probably played football, but did he even do it in college? Because like I know he wrestled in college, he won a national championship, but I don't know if Brock Lesnar like even played college football and he turned up in an NFL training camp.
Yeah,
I don't think he did. Sure I'm sorry, Jonathan. Yeah,
no, I just said I'm not sure about that. You can go ahead.
No, I don't think he did. I think he's just the kind of guy that just thinks he can do anything. And I love that. But you know, when he came into the UFC, it took him a while to get ready, but at least he came with the wrestling background. And it seemed like he was committed to being a mixed martial artist. And he entered the division where we were devoid of any and all talent, any and all professional talent. So he was a welcome addition. But anyway, just, you know, I just want to keep it professional. This is a real sport with real athletes that put in years of training to accomplish what they've accomplished. So
Michael says, why not? How about a circus division in the UFC? Bellator tried that. I mean, they didn't admit that that's what they were doing. But, you know, a few years back when we had Kimbo Slice fighting Dada 5000 and like a 60-year-old Hoist Gracie fighting a 55-year-old Ken Shamrock on the same card, that's basically what that was. And may Kimbo Slice rest in peace, by the way. But that was a circus division. Was essentially
the UFC circus division is called Bellator.
The thing is, like, I think they've cleaned it up a little bit, Bellator. Like Bella, and they just put up an epic fight, you know, with AJ McKee winning against Pitbull a couple weeks back. So like, I feel like Bellator went on a little detour of freak show, and their fight. It's like your teenage years. You ever see, Frank, what the Amish do with that Rumspringa? Like you come to you're living the Amish life, and then you reach a certain age. I don't know if it's 18, 21. And you get to go wild. Like you get to go off, you know, you get to embrace technology. You get to use blenders freely. You get to, you know, to have sex with whoever you want to on Rumspringa, drink, all that stuff. And then you go back to the Amish lifestyle. Maybe some choose not to go back. Maybe they choose to just live out in the world.
Jonathan, I can't tell you how tough that was. My sound was breaking up, so every other word of that outlandish speech he just gave, what made it even funnier. I get break up, sex with whoever you want, break up, Amish, break up. Yeah. I have no idea what you're saying, but it was funny.
It's like that one phone commercial when they're talking about the bad network, and I think it's between Giancarlo Stanton and Aaron Judge, and he's like, I usually, you know, try to think about when I was back in the day hitting home runs in Little League, and Stanton hears about, hit home runs in Little League, and he's cracking home runs off these Little League kids, all due to a bad network.
So I apologize for my connection breaking up, but I'm saying that Bellator, they went on their Rumspringa. They took their break from serious promotion. They went off, they had some drinks, they had sex with whoever they wanted to, they made some freak show fights, and then they came back. Then they circled back to becoming a little bit more serious. So they did come back. We're going to wrap things up. Huge thanks to Johnathan Ramlakhan. Frank, can I get a ruling on this? I'm trying to figure out if I owe Malki Kawa an apology or not, because he did try to get in and I didn't see Manny's message, but he tried to get in 34 minutes late. So I don't know if that's on me for not seeing that he was there, or if it's on him for being late.
What
so
are
what
we
do I
gonna
do?
Dump Johnathan? This is a real show. We have guests.
No,
we
I was
said
going to
this.
keep Johnathan in. I would have kept Johnathan in. I would have just brought Malki in as well. And I didn't see the message till it was too late. So I don't and you know, and
tell
and
Malki we would have made room for him if he still represented John Jones.
Oh, I'm going to need you to write that text, big guy. So I don't know. I feel bad because he did show up, and then by the time I realized he was there, he was gone. So I don't know if that's on me or on him. I don't know what to say because I gotta write him after the show. I don't know if I should be cross with him or he should be crossed with me. I don't know. I don't know what to do with this. So
let's
we will
invite him
figure it
back
out
next week. Yeah.
We will figure it out. But huge thanks to Johnathan Ramlakhan. And huge thanks as well, even though his connection crapped out, James Walker did try to be here. He was having some emergency automotive work done. Huge thanks, as always, to Frank Zaffere. And guys, huge thanks to the Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill for making this show possible. I love that buffalo shrimp. I'm getting a hankering for it right now because when we do the show and it takes us up until 7:30, my dinner time is right around 7:45. So giddy up. I'm going to find my way to a Quarterdeck Seafood Bar and Neighborhood Grill. I'm going to have that Italian beef sandwich. I'm going to knock down a couple of cocktails because, you know, when it comes to cocktails, I can carry my own. I can drink anybody under the table. The cocktails at the Quarterdeck will cure your ales. If you want to peep their menu, there are so many amazing options: burgers, sandwiches, baby back ribs, fresh seafood right out of the ocean. If you want to peep their menu and find the location nearest to you, visit them on the web at quarterdeckrestaurants.com and make sure you make the Quarterdeck your spot to watch every UFC pay-per-view fight for zero cover charge. That's the magic of it, because sometimes we have debates on this show. Hey, is this card worth $70? Is that card worth $70? It's never $70 at the Quarterdeck. You roll in there, you pay nothing at the door, no cover, enjoy the delicious food and ice cold beverages while you take in these fights for zero cover charge. The Quarterdeck, come for the food, stay for the fun. All right. We will talk to you guys again next week. I'll be back on the horn, of course, tomorrow for the final Donno Daily of the week, 12 until 1 p.m. We're going to have some amazing guests on, including a friend of this show as well. Lee Sterling is going to join me to make some weekend picks. I'm going to see if I can get Lee to make some PFL picks because there's no UFC this weekend, and he likes to make UFC picks. So maybe he's got a Rory MacDonald pick for tomorrow night. We will see about that. So for Frank Zaffere and for our main man, Johnathan Ramlakhan, and for Manny Chang in the back, I am Alex Donno. We will talk to you guys again next Thursday, 6 p.m. right here on 5 Rounds, served by the Quarterdeck on the 5 Reasons Sports Network.